Welcome to Freaked Out with your co-hosts, Liz and Landen.
What's up, everybody? Today, we are bringing you the case of the West Memphis 3, a case that I have been very interested in doing for some time now.
I didn't really know much about it. In fact, when I had heard of the story, I was pretty shocked at all the similarities to the show Stranger Things.
There's a lot of names that are connected to the show Stranger Things that is in this case, even though nothing like that took place in the actual case itself. Of course, Eddie, why he is a representation of Damien.
Absolutely. We are going to get right into it right now.
On May 5th, 1993, the West Memphis police received a phone call from a John Mark Byers indicating that it was 8 o'clock and his son had yet to return home. His son's name is Christopher.
He and his wife Melissa were getting worried about their child. A detective hurried to their home and took a description of the child, and they had said that he had left at approximately 5:30 p.m. and he was still not home.
The detective probed Mark Byers about the details of what happened leading up to Christopher's disappearance.
Now, Mark Byers informed the police officers that he had beaten his son a few times before with a belt, and according to Mark, it was based on something with a skateboard on his street.
Again, no coincidence when it came to the investigation.
Absolutely. Because while this was going on, another phone call came in from the restaurant across the street called Bojangles. Now, the same police officer headed to the restaurant and was told that there was an African-American male who had come into the restaurant. Apparently, he had seemed to be disoriented, was completely covered in blood, which is totally strange. He then went into the ladies' room, locked himself in there, and didn't come out for a long time. And because they were waiting on the police officers to show up, well, this guy ended up leaving before the officer was even able to get there.
Now, I know they can't jump to conclusions, but at least put a little bit more effort into that particular situation at Bojangles.
Don't mind jumping into conclusions surrounding a satanic ritual.
Good point.
Multiple witnesses had seen him take off behind the woods of the restaurant. Now, the manager had gone into the washroom to see if there was anything in there that she could give to the police, and she found a pair of sunglasses in the sink and, again, blood all over the place.
The police received another phone call from a home across the street from the Byers, this time from Todd and Dana Moore. They live across the street, and their son was also missing. His name was Michael.
Obviously, the police officers started to panic because now not only one child, but a second child had gone missing as well.
Dina suggested the last time that she had seen the boys was at 6 p.m. There were 3 of them, and they took off on their bicycles. Michael was last seen wearing blue pants, a blue Boy Scouts of America shirt, and an orange Boy Scout hat, and riding a light green bicycle. Michael loved wearing his scout uniform, even when it was not a meeting time. He was considered the leader of the 3, and he lived with his parents and his 9-year-old sister.
The third child was a boy by the name of Stevie Branch. He was the son of Pamela Branch, who was divorced from Stephen when he was an infant. His mother was awarded custody and then later married Terry Hobbs. He was last seen wearing blue jeans, a white t-shirt, riding a black and red bike, and he was an honor student, and he lived with his mom and his 4-year-old half-sister.
A lot of witnesses came forward saying that they saw the boys on the bikes heading towards McAuley Drive.
That particular street is a dead end. There's a little bit of a parking area, and then it goes right into a wooded area.
Now, sadly, they were not able to find anything because it was way too dark, and the mosquitoes were out pretty significantly, and they weren't able to see anything, so they decided to give it a try again in the morning.
I feel like this is like one of those critical moments. I feel like maybe their lives could have been saved. I do feel as though they could have been found at least if they put a little bit more effort into going into the dark, trying to get these kids.
The next day, when they started their search again, a man found a child's shoe, and they ended up shuffling around in the smoky water, and they ended up finding a naked body of Michael, and he was severely beaten.
I couldn't even imagine the horror as these poor babies are found one by one, especially since Michael Bowers was found next. Now, his scrotum was removed and the skin of his penis was cut off.
Obviously, this sight was horrifying to say the least. As they were searching through, they realized that there was no blood spill anywhere, and they weren't able to find any blood anywhere, not a single ounce. So that was one of the first reasons why they felt like there was some sort of satanic ritual happening.
Stephen Branch was found, and of course they had given the parents the bad news, and Stevie's mother fainted because of the large amount of stress and trauma that came forward.
The kids were all sexually assaulted. The entire area of West Memphis was traumatized, and of course not allowing their children to go out in the world because they were afraid that something would happen to them.
Hours after the boys were found, they went back to Bojangles, and the manager told them that there was still blood on the walls.
If I was a detective in this case, I would absolutely be checking all that out. I know that they did, but they didn't put too much emphasis on it.
The police went to work right away to find out about possible suspects. They were definitely under a lot of pressure because this was the biggest case they had ever come across.
Personally, I feel like they were not prepared for this case. So a week and a half after the boys were found, they received a tip about a 19-year-old Chris Morgan. He grew up in West Memphis, and he actually drove an ice cream truck in that exact same neighborhood that the children went missing.
They had figured out that Chris Morgan had met Steve Branch at least once before he went missing.
Chris moved to California just after the bodies had been discovered, and his family and his friends thought that it was very suspicious.
Chris had denied that he had any involvement in the murders.
They did ask him what he was doing the night of the murders, and he said that he was jumping off a cliff very far from where the scene of the crime had taken place, and that he went to a nightclub for the evening.
He then made a statement that he was sitting there being pressured over and over again about these murders. He said that his family and he also had problems with each other, and maybe he was experimenting and he might have blocked out and killed 3 boys and basically raped them.
They didn't have any evidence to keep him, so unfortunately they had to let him go.
I understand the connection there, but I do not believe that Chris had anything to do with these murders either. Definitely someone who was creepy and inappropriate, but not someone capable of killing, especially in this capacity in this particular situation.
The police wanted to continue on with the satanic theory, and they noticed that there was a full moon the night of the murder, and they thought that that might be the ritual murder. They decided that they were going to start looking at all the weird kids in school, Damien, Eccles, based on the fact that they felt that he was into doing satanic things, so they focused on him.
It was very uncommon back then for people to dress like in all black, dye their hair black, paint their nails black. So anyone who dressed like that would receive some sort of concern and, thinking they were against Jesus.
He lived in a trailer park and he was a high school dropout. He had been on the police's radar for more than a year.
He was very much into the Wicca religion. And one of the things in the Wicca religion is that you don't hurt anybody.
Damien was arrested for breaking and entering into an abandoned trailer a year before the murders took place.
Obviously, he shouldn't have broken into the abandoned house. But honestly, who hasn't, especially back then? If he dressed to society's norm, he would have never been targeted as a suspect.
He was in a juvenile detention center. There were rumors that he sucked the blood off of another person's arm and that he also threatened to kill his father.
I always heard about this theory on goth kids that they sucked each other's blood, and it was always someone would just assume that and spread the rumors.
Absolutely. Every single Sunday, I know I was out there trying to get blood from all the innocent bystanders.
Landen was a goth kid, and they always assumed the worst. Rumors were always floating around.
Yeah, nobody screwed with me. They left me alone, which I preferred that.
The illusion is to make everyone stay away. At least that's what a few gothic people had stated to me in the past.
I dressed that way because I wanted to, not for any other reason, but I liked the clothes and I liked the way they made me feel.
Well, that's good to know. People seized all of Damien's belongings, and they found a notebook of pentagrams and a half-human, half-goat photo in it.
Since they didn't feel like Damien could do this himself, they decided to look into his best friend, Jason Baldwin.
Now, they both lived in a trailer park, and they were both treated as outcasts. At least they had each other before all this happened.
When they interviewed Damien, they noticed that Damien has the word evil written across his fingers, and he had a pentagram necklace.
And on the night of the murders, Damien said that he was hanging out with his girlfriend. His mom had dropped her off at home, and then he spent the night at home on the phone with a friend. The police officer then asked Damien of who they thought did it, and he said probably somebody looking for a thrill kill.
That was such a trick question, as if the kid wouldn't know anything about why somebody would want to do this. They asked him a question about who he thought it was, and This was his answer. Anyone who had heard about this would automatically assume that there was some sort of thrill kill involved based on all the details.
Absolutely. Now, here's a character I want to punch in the face in this particular case. Vicky Hutchinson.
Vicky Hutchinson comes forward from a little town in Maryland. She says that her children were friends with the three boys and that she knew somebody by the name of Jesse Miskelly.
Jesse had dropped out of high school and was working. He would help people with local odd jobs for work.
Jesse, who's also mentally disabled, had an IQ of a third grader, and school was really hard for him, so he ended up dropping out.
According to Vicky, Jesse had told Vicky that Damien likes to drink blood and stuff.
I've heard people that enjoy drinking blood, but it has really nothing to do with the culture or religion of Wicca.
And a lot of kids used to get rumors spread about them when it comes to drinking blood. I know that there's some sort of kink out there, but I really don't feel like it's anything tied with the Wicca religion, so perhaps maybe just a style or preference.
Most likely, there are groups of people that believe that they're vampires and that they should be drinking blood.
We'll get into that one day. A lot of people automatically assume that I have some sort of connection to doing witchcraft because of what I do. I don't refer to myself as a witch. Not to say that I would be against anyone, involved in that, but it's just not my personal thing. I believe that there are really cool things you can do with spells, aka prayers, but I would never do anything like that for evil, and a lot of people do.
Yes, they do. People don't realize that playing with dark magic can bring bad karma, and usually tenfold if you decide that you're angry at your ex or a friend or somebody that just wronged you in the past and you decide to put some sort of curse on them, then that would be bad luck for you. It keeps rolling back. Now, regardless of how much of a protection spell they put on themselves, karma will still always find a way.
Absolutely. Anyways, back to Vicky. Vicky offers up her services to help and basically say, hey, I'll get involved and I'll find out some information. And the police were like, yeah, all right.
So the police just let her do this for shits and giggles. Why didn't she have some sort of undercover cop follow her around, getting involved, and take the reins on this?
Exactly. If there was a dangerous situation, at least as dangerous as they thought everyone, believed that he was, then why wouldn't anyone just be like, hey, I'm going to go do this, especially someone who has kids,
Vicky decided to go out with them, and then she decided to tell the police that it was called a SBAT, which is some sort of gathering for witches.
The real definition is a Wiccan coven gathering other than one of the civets. While a full moon ritual may be held for coven business meetings, social occasions, and opportunities to be, hanging out.
Damien was the one who drove her there, and she couldn't see much because it was very dark in the open field.
And apparently there was a lot of sexy chanting.
She described it as an intense scene where people were taking their clothes off, and she was very uncomfortable.
She then told Damien she was scared and to take her home, and he did.
So why wouldn't a seasoned serial killer try not to convince her to stay a little longer or try to hurt her in some sort of way? It just doesn't make any sense.
Let's keep in mind that there was an award out there for anyone who could, solve this triple murder.
Yep, let's give them some false information so that we can get the reward money.
Now, according to sources, they gave her a polygraph and she passed with flying colors, conveniently. Which, by the way, I'm not completely convinced that she had a passing polygraph test. I feel like she exaggerated a lot of it.
So do you know what happened that night?
I decided to take some time to try to channel this particular situation to see if I could pick anything up. And I keep feeling like this situation was them honestly dropping acid and doing some crazy shit because, kids are kids and they just want to explore and experiment. And I feel like they were looking for more of an excuse to have a place to party and fit in with other outcasts while experimenting in drugs. And I don't believe they had any sort of bad energy. They were just being wild kids exploring their bodies. I feel like there were a couple of orgies that may have been taking place, but in reality, I don't see that they were doing any sort of ritual, maybe chanting a few things in the sense of their coven, but that's about it. This woman took this story and multiplied it by 100.
Just like so many cases that we have seen in the past, Jesse Miskelly was brought in for questioning, and he completely denied anything to do with the murders. They were just hoping that he would slip up somehow.
We have to keep in mind as well that Jesse's mental capacity was at a third grader, which in my opinion should be illegal.
Yep, especially without an adult or an attorney with him. They did a polygraph test. At the end of this polygraph test, the guy says that he was lying his ass off.
Now they continued to push and push and push him, and then at that point they decided to turn on the recorder.
Now I want to mention on a side note, he did not lie during that polygraph test about anything other than dabbling in drugs. That was the last question that they asked, and it was the only one that he failed.
He then informed the police that they killed dogs during this ritual, and they screwed girls, and they took turns screwing all these girls.
Well, that was according to Jesse. They had a big orgy.
Which is pretty much what I had seen. So I don't feel as though there was any sort of murdering animals at all, actually.
They asked about the night of the murders. Jesse explained that Damien made him go into the woods at that night, and according to a statement, he said that the boys and Damien hollered to him, and he said Damien hit one of the boys really bad, and according to him, he also raped the child.
Another thing Jesse had stated was that Michael ran, he was able to escape, and then he decided to grab him for the guys, and then he just decided to leave the situation.
He said he couldn't stomach what they were doing, and only a month later, they arrested Damien and Jason at Damien's home, and they were charged with 3 counts of capital murder.
There are a lot of inconsistencies with that confession. The timeline did not match. He had informed them that they used a brown rope to tie the children up, when in fact it was the children's shoelaces. It just didn't make any sense, but they decided that it was enough to convict all 3 of these young men.
I also agree, and also knowing that this guy was mentally disabled, like, how much does he really know what he's saying? A lot of them get pressured to just say something because they get coerced by the police or anybody to do that, you know? Jesse also indicated that they took the boys at noon, but the kids were still in school at that point, so how could that even happen as well? Like I said, mentally unstable, disabled person.
There would have been some indication that the kids skipped school, but in reality they did not. They were all accounted for at school that day.
I'm also sure that the parents would have also been freaking out earlier in the day if the children had not only missed school, but missed dinner. They would have been looking for them a lot earlier than the time they were.
And obviously, because Jesse did have a low IQ, a lot of people that are mentally disabled go along with stories to appease people. That's how I feel about this particular situation.
As I said before, I absolutely agree. He was also bullied a lot in school, and because of how much of a difficult time that he had, he would agree to people just to say, yep, that's true. So you're definitely right on that situation.
And as the trial approached, they decided that Jason and Damien needed to be tried together, and then they tried Jesse separately because they needed his confession for their other trial.
They asked Jesse to stand and testify against the other 2, but he refused because he said it was a false confession.
Since they didn't get this confession, they decided to search Jason and Damien's homes again.
Now here's a kicker. During the trial, one of the lawyers asked when was the blood sample from Bojangles sent to analyze. They informed the lawyer that it was never sent off.
Apparently, this particular situation that took place at Bojangles was not relevant enough in their timeline or story, so they decided to just, throw it out? I personally believe they threw it out on purpose because they felt like it was not needed.
Even though a guy comes into a restaurant covered in blood, and then also you're getting 2 phone calls of missing children at the same time, but it's not relevant.
Right, and a third
not
one.
Even to look, and then a third child then goes missing, and that's still not a reason for you to take a look at this blood and why this dude was covered in blood.
Right, and you know what's funny is nobody found this man's body anywhere, so it couldn't have been his own blood.
Exactly. They then asked where the blood samples were at this time, and they said they didn't know it was lost. How convenient.
Oh yeah, they lost it. They lost it on purpose. And I know for a fact that blood, if they had tested it, it would have matched the DNA of all 3 of those children. They continue to ask where the blood was. Well, there was the blood.
About 3 months after the murder, they did a dive in the water behind Jason's home, and they found a serrated knife that would be matching the description of what had cut Christopher.
We have talked a lot about these 3 men and that they've endured during this crazy rigmarole of conspiracy theories turned into murder, turned into capital charges.
We all know this part of the story. We're dying to hear about the next part. Now, what happened to these young boys?
I cannot describe the amount of horror that I have had to endure, listen to in this story with these 3 kids. I actually almost decided to not do it because it was too much to hear from me personally. But I knew that because it was so difficult, I had to keep going. So I took my time with this one. I did not want to tell the full story, but I'm going to give you guys as much detail as I humanly can without making me sick.
This is definitely hard for you, I know. And I know you've been working on it for the last week, and you were struggling even to finish, so I commend you.
First thing I want to mention is that none of these boys were even associated with the children. So none of these boys have ever even had interactions with Damien or Jason, Jesse, none of them. So these 3 boys were murdered by somebody who was pretty skilled.
Makes sense to me, not to mention some adolescent teenagers who have literally no experience in life before.
Right? I feel very strong energy around the West Memphis Police Department wanting their theory of this satanic ritual to be accurate so badly that they found the most likely suspects they could potentially find in order to prove their theory correctly.
I absolutely agree with that. The police made a lot of mistakes in this case, and they were fixated on an image rather than the facts and evidence that were provided.
Absolutely. All 3 of these little boys have come to me, which is not too normal. Normally 1 or 2, but especially when kids, especially boys, have been sexually abused, they tend to shy away from communicating with me particularly. I'm not sure if it's because they're uncomfortable or whatever the case may be, but these boys were really loud about it.
Well, that's definitely uncommon, for you at least.
Michael specifically was the loudest, which makes sense since he was the leader of the pack of friends, and they really just wanted to have a nice night out to distress from the day of school and play. And I know that the parents were a little bit abusive. They just wanted some downtime with each other.
So how many people were involved in this?
I know it seems out there, but I'll be completely honest. I only feel like there's one culprit. A very good at manipulating child predator. Now, Michael shows me that there are many other victims as well, but this particular day was above and beyond this guy's normal protocol.
So where did this all start?
Now, I know that the evidence from Bojangles has been lost somehow, but I keep being told that one of the lead detectives in this case didn't lose it. They disposed of it because they didn't want anything to interfere with their investigation. I also feel like one of the detectives were looking for a big break in some sort of recognition, and he really didn't care who committed the crimes. He just wanted to name somebody.
Well, they just needed to be able to pinpoint it on somebody to give everybody a peace of mind that this was the person and they are no longer out in the world.
Exactly. Now, going back to the night of the murders, I keep seeing that the 3 boys were doing their normal routines. The 3 of them were like kind of screwing around on their bikes, and they would also go to this little area, I would say the wooded area, but I feel like they wouldn't go like too deep into the woods, but a little bit deeper than, normal. I would say that this area was like a setup somehow, like a fort or something kind of cool. There might have been even like, logs or something that they could kind of just hide inside of. Now, I know that Christopher Byers had been beaten by his father at this point, and I feel like he might have been venting to his friends, calling his dad a jerk, whatever he needed to do to kind of let off the steam that his father had done to him,
Of course he did. It was a safe place to do that kind of thing.
I keep seeing that the boys didn't get there to their destination of where they usually sit and, vent and do their little kid thing. But I feel like there was a man. I feel like he was black and 6 foot, and he was wearing a lot of dark clothing. I actually feel like he was dressed for some sort of rainy weather. It didn't suit the temperature of this particular day, though.
Maybe somebody from out of town?
Definitely someone from out of town. Not at all of the area, of course, or lived in this. Definitely a passerby.
What happened next?
I see that this man was walking, and I'm not sure why he was walking. From what I feel, and what the boys are also telling me, it could have been so many different reasons, but his car was parked somewhere else. And I think he might have been looking for something to eat, which is probably why he kind of went to the Bojangles area. I'm not entirely sure, but the boys did indicate they really didn't get that information from him.
So he's just walking down the street randomly and then comes across the boys.
I feel like the kids were pedaling away on their bikes, slowly talking, shooting the shit. And I feel like this guy overheard the kids talking about playing cops and robbers. And they had, done that in school sometimes. And I feel like he called the boys over. Now, from what I can see, this man is extremely socially awkward. But for whatever reason, I guess because he's a predator, he can communicate with kids pretty well, especially boys, no problem.
Well, usually pedophiles and child predators are very socially awkward and they can't communicate with anyone other than the children.
I keep seeing that the kids knew better not to talk to strangers, and I do feel like their parents instilled that in them, but I feel like this guy kind of made them feel bad for him. I don't necessarily feel like he was physically disabled, but I think he had some limping action going on.
Were there any distinctive marks on him that the kids can identify?
Sorta. He had a lot of facial issues, craters, maybe a scar or two. They show me it was difficult to see a lot of his face though because he did have sunglasses on as well.
So the kids felt sorry for him and they started to talk to him. Do they know what they were talking about?
I'm not exactly sure. I don't feel as though they were having any sort of conversation about anything other than the weather at that point.
Do you believe that the limping was real?
Based on the physical strength of this guy, I feel like the limping was definitely a ploy. I feel like he was trying to befriend the children, make them feel sorry for him, and I feel like the kids at this point felt like he was harmless, so no concern about him.
Definitely Predator 101 there. Make yourself look like a wounded puppy.
Pretty much.
Is there anything else distinctive that you want to point out?
I feel like he had a war medal. I feel like he pulled it out and showed the kids, and all the kids thought it was pretty cool.
I'm sure they did. I'm sure they were very interested in that, especially being young boys.
Now, I feel like Michael started asking him a lot of questions about his life and what he did for a living, and I can see that the guy had indicated to him that he worked on a boat, and he caught and gutted fish, which kind of makes sense with the gear.
A fisherman with an army background. Interesting.
He asked the boys if they wanted to see his equipment and if they wanted to try gutting a fish because he still had a few in a container. I feel like Christopher and Michael were totally interested in doing this, so they decided to follow the guy, but from what I can see, he went into the complete opposite direction of where his vehicle should have been.
Were any of the kids hesitant to go with him?
Stevie was extremely hesitant. He felt like this guy was bad news. He kept quiet and really didn't interact too much. I see he pedaled away alongside of his friends, making suggestions that the boys to go back on their route.
I can definitely only imagine.
I feel like he told the kids he couldn't remember where his vehicle was and he might have been lost, and that's okay, and he'll show them later, but he said he needed to sit down a while.
Of course he did, because he's crippled.
Yeah. I feel like Stevie was the most hesitant again going forward, but he continued to follow along since his friends went with him. I keep seeing that all the kids were on their bikes, and as they were circling this guy, I feel like there were a couple of witnesses around, but perhaps they weren't paying attention too much. He made a suggestion for them to play a game. He had suggested, yep, you guessed it, cops and robbers. I believe that Stevie and Michael were both suggesting that they needed a lot of players to play cops and robbers, but I see that he was sitting there making the suggestion that he was using a knife to cut like a piece of wood. I don't necessarily feel like it's important information, but the kids let me know anyway.
May have been used as a weapon later on.
That's absolutely true. I didn't even think of that. I feel like this guy had informed Michael that it was a different kind of cops and robbers where he would tie them up and then release them. He shows me that he had rope in his backpack and he had a couple of knives. He said that if the kids followed along in this game, basically he would let them play with the knives, maybe even take them home. I believe he used the fact that Michael was like a Boy Scout to his advantage by telling him he'd teach him like techniques on complicated knots, and he would give him a carving knife as a gift for playing.
Michael seemed to be interested in all the wilderness stuff and being part of that side of life, so he definitely is walking right into his trap.
The kids were enticed by this offer and decided that they would play along, and I feel like he tied the kids up, but he didn't use the rope. He, used the shoelace, which is probably odd, I don't understand that part.
What happened next?
He decided to tie them all up. Once he did, obviously, he took their shoes. He told them that once the game was over, he would give them their shoes back, and I feel as though Stevie was extremely hesitant to do so, but he followed along with what his friends are doing, and they made it into like a game. And they were giggling. I feel like they were all giggling until this man decided to ask Stevie and the rest of the children to take their clothes off. Obviously, Stevie refused. He refused to do so, so he ended up removing Stevie's clothes. This is when the kids obviously started to panic and scream, and they did try to escape, but they weren't able to do so.
Were they far into the forest?
Far enough that they couldn't be heard. I am sure that people walked by this forest in that area, but they probably wouldn't have heard them. I don't feel like anybody walking by could have heard them because there might have been like traffic muffles or I don't know.
So is this when this man decided to start raping the children?
Yes. I see while he was raping Stevie, Michael was trying to figure out ways to get himself untied and trying to get his hands untied. Unfortunately, there was just no such luck. And I feel like this man told Stevie that if he didn't comply, he would die. And that's exactly what he did. He ran to the other two boys and killed them as well. I feel like it was an extreme overkill. I feel like he took some of the body parts as souvenirs too. Maybe have even placed them somewhere, I don't know, in a container where he usually keeps fish. It's just honestly so disturbing.
That is insane.
The reason that he decided to go to Bojangles, which by the way, I really feel like this is pretty much the area of where the kids were brutally murdered. I feel like he was exhausted after this excursion, obviously. He decided that he was going to go back to the washroom, to the Bojangles, just clean himself off a bit, and then go on his merry way. I feel like he had the children's body parts in a bag and proceeded to head to his truck. I do feel like when he got back to his truck, I don't know, he decided to change his mind or something. He ended up placing the children elsewhere. I feel like all of this happened during the night. I keep seeing that he may have gone back to the site a few times where he killed the kids to gather up some other items. And I guess it was more so as a memento. It is pretty crazy.
Does he have anyone in his life that knows about this?
I feel like people suspect. I don't necessarily feel like, he's been caught. I don't feel like they know it was the West Memphis area or those children. But I also don't necessarily feel like this man is still alive either. But I don't know. You know what it reminds me of? That movie, like, I Know What You Did Last Summer. That's kind of the fisherman look I get from him.
Absolutely. So the kids suffered a tremendous amount of suffering. So how are they now?
I mean, they're still pretty pissed off. I feel like they've crossed over, but it took them years and years to cross over. I feel like the kids continuously visit their family, and even those 3 men of West Memphis, they've been following this story as well, even since they passed. Obviously, they aren't suffering anymore, but everyone carried on without their case being solved. But from what I can see, I don't feel like they'll really ever solve this case.
Did this man kill anyone else after these children?
I feel like he killed about 46 kids. I also feel like these kids' numbers are 31, 32, 33. He had done this multiple times. Normally, he only takes 1 child, but he couldn't choose between the 3 kids, so he basically attached them to each other, and because he came up with this plan, it made it a lot easier for him to, hurt these kids.
Do you feel like the Army medal is his?
I'm not sure. I feel like it may be, which might be the reason why this man is a murderer now, because he had a lot of PTSD and suffering with a lot of trauma in his life.
I'm assuming because he had all the kids tied up together already beforehand, it made it a lot easier for him to kill them one by one. I feel as though this man is not only a child predator, but maybe a serial killer.
I would agree with you. I feel like he's not from West Memphis either. I see that this particular individual might be from Kentucky. I also feel like he spent a lot of time seaside because, he was a fisherman.
Do you feel like he was drinking at all or anything?
I do feel like he was drunk. I feel like he took the kids in a completely different location where he actually killed them. I don't know. Like, I feel like he was kind of confused. It's a very, very complicated, complex, not understanding why he kept going back and forth and doing all this. So it could have been drunk for sure.
Is there anything else you would like to share on this particular case?
The boys show me a lot of gruesome details, but I can't repeat them because it's too much to say out loud. I feel like he thought he was going to get caught. He had heard the sirens. He had heard many different things as he was gathering these bodies together, getting ready to dispose of them. I also feel like he was ready to get caught in this situation because everything that was lacking in this case. He really got away with murder of these 3 kids. The kids were pretty helpful in showing me things, obviously, after they were brutally murdered, but this man definitely walked into Bojangles. And I feel as though he was hoping that someone would catch him. He had some sort of moment where he felt guilt. And some details they did give me that was not provided was this. The reason he had gone there in the first place was to wash off some of the evidence, some of the blood. He had also had a lot of weapons that he used, and he just wanted to wash them all off. From what I can see, the weapons he used were all like fishing related and a couple of knives. Because he had sexually assaulted them and brutally murdered them, he was exhausted, and I feel as though he had multiple personalities, maybe a multiple personality disorder, which might be why I'm so confused on a lot of the details, because he might not remember. I feel like he was arguing with himself. The kids show me that they definitely believe that there were multiple personalities involved as well, because when they would yell out to him, sometimes he would freak out, and other times he would be nice, kind, and gentle. And he would also have like a nice, calming voice. And from what the kids showed me, one of his personalities may have been female. Now, I feel like the female personality who was the one who tried to clean everything up. Anyways, after he had gone to Bojangles, he thought that he was caught because he had seen everyone there acting squirrely. And he became extremely paranoid. And because he had become extremely paranoid, he had seen them contacting the police. Now, obviously, he vanished into the woods again, and I feel like he lost the kids and the location. It was like the lost personality memory of that moment, you know what I mean? Anyways, it took him approximately 2 hours to find these kids' bodies, and I feel like he even had a nap with the kids next to him once he did find them. It's just weird. I'm just getting some very odd information, a lot of blackout moments, but then again, this is everything that the kids are showing me. Anyways, he disposed of the bodies only because he was getting tired and also because it was getting light outside and he wanted to dispose of them so he could finish getting off. Ugh. I see that he left at about 4:30 in the morning and he got back to his truck and he left, never to come back again.
Wow, crazy. That's a lot of information. I hope that this man somehow, in some way, gets caught in some sort of way. I know you don't necessarily know if he's dead or alive.
I just can't feel his energy. But I was thinking about this. I would say he was probably 40 years old at the time of these murders. So I can only imagine that he's well into his late 70s now, or even in his early 80s. So perhaps maybe he's just in some sort of home or facility where his memory doesn't exist anymore. I mean, he does have multiple personality disorder as well. He might not have any self-awareness. So I'm thinking maybe he's alive, just kind of stuck in a body at this point.
Well, thank you very much for doing this case. I know it was very tough. I'm glad we got down to actually finally working on it. If you guys have yet to check out Stranger Things, a lot of the characters in the show are based off of this case and off of these kids, including Eddie. He's a great, lovable character. A lot of people accused him of murder because of him being different. It's definitely a good lesson to learn as well. Don't judge a book by its cover. Next week, we'll be covering part 2 of the Crystal Rogers. I know you guys have been waiting for that one. Until next time, guys, stay freaked out.